Hello there and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Today I'll be walking you through how I made the gathered neckline blouses that you saw in the Arcana lookbook. I made one in silk taffeta. This is a teal and brown shot silk taffeta from Silk Baron, of course, and another in an Essex linen. This is a metallic linen blend from the manufacturer Robert Kaufman. And I do have a video showing how I made those first two blouses over on my Patreon, but today I'm going to be making a third blouse with a few tiny tweaks to the pattern. This time I have a black and white and gold mix of threads, and it turns into this sort of almost olive green color depending on the lighting, so you'll see what I mean over on the blue patterning table of doom, as usual. And as I always say, I'm beginning with my basic bodice block, so let's just grab a tracing of that, including the darts, all relevant information, the apex, etc., because I am going to eliminate these darts into fullness at the neckline today. You've seen me do this before in this video. I'll put a card up to a video where I've shown how I do this before, an older video I suppose, but I will show you from the get-go here. So I have my two darts, as usual, and I'm going to move them up into the neckline, like so. I will actually end up bringing out this shoulder a little bit today as well, but I'll refine that when we get to it here. I will need this original neckline measurement when I do the collar later, but of course my block pattern still has it, so not to worry. Let me go ahead and close my dart at the waist, close the dart in the side. I'm just going to end up bringing my arm side down 1/4 inch and out 3/8 of an inch, like so, just to bring that shoulder out a bit. For again, a little bit of a strong shoulder. We all know how I like a strong shoulder. I didn't put a shoulder pad in this, but you could if you wanted to. Make it even more 1940s looking. I will go ahead and use some scraps here to fill in and split my dart fullness up here into the neckline. I can then go ahead and smooth this off, like so. Cut this excess off where it's sticking out past the center front. Smooth off my side seam. And this will all gather down into my eventual collar for the neckline here. Little stand collar I'll have today. So all that dart fullness from the waist and side dart has now been put up to the neckline. I really like this modification, especially for blouses. I've used it for blouses for years. So it works really well for a blouse or a dress. Obviously, a thinner fabric works better with gathering, so a thick coating wool would probably be slightly frustrating, but anything else works pretty well. I did add a 1/2 inch down the center front, so that we could do some sort of placket or overlap or something going on there. I used two different closures for these two different blouses that I'll be showing you today. Arcana Blouse Front 2023. For the back, I again will trace a copy of my basic bodice block. And again, I will move the waist dart up into the neckline so I can have gathering along the back neckline as well. So all the darts are being transferred into gathering for this particular design. You don't have to, of course. You could do it just for the front or just for the back if you wanted to. These are just techniques kind of in your design arsenal, so you can move them around and use them as you see fit. And again, I need to bring out the shoulder line, that 3/8 of an inch, and down the arm side, that 1/4 inch, like I did in the front, just so everything will match up properly. And I'm not changing the neckline from my basic block at all, because I want the highest possible neckline that I'm going to put my little stand collar on. This will be cut on the center back, so I'm making sure I have no seam allowance down the center back, and then I can go ahead and close this dart from this pivot point here in the back, like so. And again, fill in the top of this with some extra paper and smooth that off. All right, so now I need the neckline measurements for both my front and back block so I can draft the stand collar here. You do see me draft a lot of stand collars. I quite like them, you know. All right, grab a big enough piece of scrap here, and I will go ahead and draw a straight line, an L shape to start with. This is going to be the center back here. I'm going to measure outwards from that the neck measurement of the back neckline. So go ahead and measure the original, which is going to be 3 inches for me, and draw a 90-degree line up. So this is the back neckline, and that is with the shoulder seam allowance included. And for the front, I will measure that as well to the center front, and that is, I think, 4.5 for me, if I remember correctly. I'm going to come up a 1/2 inch in the front and tip this collar up just that little bit, and I'm going to make it 1 inch tall. Then I decide to make it 1 1/4 inch tall. I second guess the whole idea. Square this off and then add seam allowance. Sorry if you can hear any mumbling in the background. There are other people living in this house and they are watching TV upstairs, but my microphone is good enough to pick that up, sadly. And you of course can make this pointed or curved or whatever shape you want at the front. And then it's time to go ahead and work on the sleeve pattern for this. This blouse does end at the waist with a waistband, so I'll show you how I do that later. I don't make a waistband pattern. I just go ahead and cut a like 35-inch long by 4-inch piece of fabric to use as a waistband, because I use straight across waistbands as opposed to shaped waistbands, but whichever you prefer, you could go ahead and use on a blouse like this one. I will use my standard block sleeve here, trace a copy of that, with its elbow dart and all that jazz, which we will be quickly ignoring. Front, back, center. I'm going to draw lines 3 inches out in the center on each side, and then I'm going to just square off 90 degrees down from the end of the sleeve cap, I guess, along the underarm seam instead of having it be curved and narrowed, because of course I want to make this sleeve bigger as opposed to smaller. And I'm going to raise that sleeve cap at least an inch in the center there, curve that off. I also want to make this at least an inch and a half longer, so when I square this off, I want to make sure that's the case. And I want it to dip down in the back more than the front, so that's what I'm doing here. Similar sleeve modifications to ones you've seen me use before, creating either bishop sleeves or sleeves for my other sort of blousey, historically inspired shirts, like the vampire shirt I did, was that last year? And the other silk blouses I've done over the years. We all know I like a billowy sleeve, and these are actually kind of on the tame side, as far as the full extent a sleeve can go to. Really, the only limit on your sleeve pattern is probably the width of your fabric, really, if you would like to expand. And you could always piece it together and use more than 1 yard of fabric in a sleeve. So down the center of this, I'm going to go ahead and add in some width. Just go ahead and make that 2.5 inches here. And close my sleeve back up. Boop. Tape that down. I'll use the center and the guidelines either side to add some width to this. Still keeping my little bit of a dip and curve here for the back. And I'll cut up this front split here. And I'm going to add in a wedge of fullness along that. So I'm not adding any more to the sleeve cap, but I am adding more to the sleeve hem. Starting to flare the sleeve a little bit here. It's probably 1.5 inches down here at the hem. Of course, tapers up to nothing at the sleeve cap. Plenty of floops to tape down on this piece, unfortunately. When will I run out of tape? Probably soon. I keep extra behind me. And then for the back, I will again add in some extra fullness, a little bit more than the front, because the back of the sleeve, you really want it to billow. So I'll add in a good chunk back here, probably 2.5, 3 inches back here. Again, not even bothering to measure, just eyeballing that. Yeah, probably a good 3 inches back here, as opposed to the 1.5 in the front. You could add 6 inches back here. Be very fun. We'll draw in a new center seam for this as a guideline. Arcana blouse sleeve 2023, front, back. Keep everything straight. I'm deciding I want to make this even more pronounced, like even a little bit longer, because it is still just only a tiny bit longer than the actual original sleeve was. Although my block sleeve is on the longer side. I was designing a different sleeve this week, and I had a muslin of my just standard sleeve to play with because I was trying to narrow it, and it really is already quite long. It comes down quite far on my hand. I do prefer, if a sleeve comes out a little bit long or a little bit short, it to be a little bit long. But I add on another 1.5 inches to this. Just follow that original curve I had drawn in, like so. And again, tape down my floops in the back. So now I have my pattern. Again, I'm just going to finish this waist with a waistband, like I would a pencil skirt, just for the top half of the body instead of the bottom half of the body. And here, of course, is the finished teal silk blouse, or Viridian silk blouse, I guess, being worn in the Arcana lookbook, both underneath the brocade vest and by itself here with a stretch velvet skirt. I'm also looking forward to wearing this with like wool pencil skirts or various other things in my wardrobe anytime I wear brown, really. And because that was sort of a mock-up for the blouse to go underneath the copper corset outfit, I went ahead and started making the actual blouse for that out of this brown and gold linen cotton blend. I do again think this is the Robert Kaufman metallic Essex blend. It's just a couple of years since I bought this, so I can't exactly remember. I bought this in like 2019 or something like that. Now the only changes I made to this were to add 3/4 of an inch down this center front here to give myself a little bit more room for a button placket down the front of this, because I knew this fabric could handle having buttonholes put in it, having worked with similar fabrics before to make different shirts. I did also cut 2-inch wide strips of fusible interfacing for the center front button plackets of this as well, just to stabilize that center front, since I was going to be doing buttonholes. And here was my second version that I made back last year for the Arcana lookbook in, again, the gold. And again, the modifications from the first version of the pattern were very subtle. I just actually extended the length of the sleeves so I could do a drawstring cuff instead for this one. But I did want to make a few more modifications to this pattern today before I made a third and final sort of version of this. The first thing I'm going to do is actually give myself a little bit more room along this button placket. I don't know why I only extended it a little. Let's go ahead and just give this a nice bit of extension past the center front. I want this to finish about 1/2 inch at least past the center front, plus have a healthy fold over. So I'm going to add on another, I think it's 3/8 of an inch this needed, so that this fold under here is at least 1 inch, because we want to have plenty of placket here for my buttonholes and buttons to go onto. And I'll just tape down the multitude of floopage going on in the back of this now. That's what happens when you make tiny tweaks to a pattern. The first version fit fine. I did just want to go ahead and make a couple of tweaks though, you know, just to really refine what I enjoyed about this pattern and make it perfect for me and my wardrobe. I will go ahead and add on a 1/4 inch along the side seam to both the front here, and then I will do this again to the back. I simply decided in the end that I didn't want this to fit as tightly as, say, a dress bodice or a bodice would. I wanted to have a tiny bit more room here because this is supposed to be a blouse, something that I'm wearing, you know, tucked in and possibly underneath other stuff, and I just want a little bit more movement and a little bit more room in this. And because I extended the front of this a little bit, in the end I wanted to go ahead and extend the collar as well, so I went ahead and added a 1/2 inch along to my stand collar as well that you saw me make earlier. And then for the back, I just need to add that 1/4 inch along the side seam as well, just in keeping with the change I made to the front. So here's my blouse pattern, and then I'm going to go ahead and do placketed sleeve cuffs on this one. So I have a sleeve cuff pattern and my 2 placket pieces. You can see me talk about these in more detail in this shirt making video, and I definitely think you should check that one out if you haven't seen me sew one of these cuff plackets before, because today it's actually very hard to see in the fabric I end up using what the heck-a-doodle is going on, because as soon as I lay the placket pieces onto this fabric, they sort of disappear, and honestly it was hard to see what I was doing in person. Like, it was hard for me to see what I was doing in the moment, let alone here on camera. So when we get to that part later, I'll talk you through this a little bit more. And because I had extended the length of this sleeve for that second gold version, I wanted to go ahead and just bring that back to something a little bit more reasonable, since I will be gathering this into a wrist cuff today. But then I could go ahead and cut everything out of, again, this Essex linen, metallic linen blend. This again is a black, white, and gold metallic thread blend, which is a sort of grayish, brownish, greenish color, depending on the lighting. It's very changeable color, very iridescent, which is of course why I like it. And I did pre-wash this fabric, and I had to lay it out in its full width to be able to cut my sleeves, because they were a little bit wider than this. This is only a 45 width fabric, as opposed to the wider widths I'm sometimes used to, like 54 to 60 inch fabrics that I tend to like to use. Again, this is one of the reasons why I never tell you how much fabric I use for my projects, or I don't tend to. It's because depending on the size of your pattern and depending on the width of your fabric, you will need a very different amount. So I needed more fabric today because it was only a 45 width. You know, if I had something that was a 60 width, I probably could have fit everything on a 1.5 yards, you know? It's hard to be able to say what you're going to need because I don't know what kind of fabric you're buying, really. But I am just using pins to mark where I need to gather, put my gathering in, so I can gather that neckline down later into my collar. So just marking what I need, kind of like the notches, marking those with pins. And then I went ahead and cut out these collar pieces in interfacing as well, so I can use fusible interfacing on at least one side of that collar. I was going to do 2 sides, but I thought it was going to be thick enough with just one. And then I cut out my little cuff and placard pieces as well. And then here for my sleeves, I'm going to have gathering stitching along the sleeve cap at the top and also along the cuffs. So I need to go ahead and put indications in there for where I will need to do that as well. And then I made a bit of a mistake on this project because I hadn't done that sleeve plackety cuff stuff in a while. So I went ahead and sewed the underarm seam of my sleeves first, which no, do all the plackety nonsense and then sew the underarm seam. So a lesson to take from this one. If don't do as I do in this video, do as I do in the other videos where I remember to do the placket stuff first, because yikes. But in general, I had serged my raw edges of this fabric so that I could, again, throw this blouse in the wash in the end because it had been pre-washed anyhow. And I'm going to go ahead and put that fusible interfacing onto one side of my collar piece here. I did cut this collar out twice so that it can be self-faced or self-lined later, but I just ended up interfacing only one side of this just because I figured that was going to be enough stiffness with this medium weight linen. There'll be plenty up here along my neck. And I will just pin those right sides together around the outside edge. And then I'm going to start a 1/2 inch away from where that will sew onto the neckline and sew my collar closed here, sewing up to the points of the collar, leaving the needle down, picking the presser foot up, moving the project, presser foot back down, keep sewing. Just how I get around corners, no problem there. And I will go ahead and start putting in my gathering stitching, again, increasing from my standard stitch length of around 12 stitches per inch up to the largest this machine goes to, which is 6 stitches per inch, to go ahead and put in 2 rows of gathering stitching along any of the areas I will need to have gathered from this blouse. And yes, I was arguing with my bobbin at this point because it was a little bit bent and I ended up having to retire it, sadly enough. Back over here on the ironing board, I will go ahead and clip my corners and the very slight curve along the top of this collar so I can turn this right side out and press everything into place. You can also try and sneak a little bit of understitching in here or do top stitching on something like this, which you may have seen in some of my other shirt making videos here on the channel. I haven't made a blouse or a shirt in a while, but I used to make quite a few. I think it was like 2021. I was making quite a few shirts back in 2021 for some reason. Then I can just give this a nice press into place. The nice thing about using a linen cotton blend is that it irons very well. So with a little steam, you really can shape things very easily. But I'll press up my underarm seam that I shouldn't have sewed. But then I can get to constructing the main body of my blouse. I will go ahead and line up the front to top of the back here and pin those along the side seams. Like so. I like already having my gathering stitching in before I start constructing anything together. Just easier to do the gathering stitching when everything is still flat, which again is the same principle that I should have applied to doing the plackets on the sleeves. Wouldn't that be easier to do while this is still flat? Yes. Always ask yourself, will any part of this process be easier to do while this piece of fabric is still flat? And if the answer is yes, do that fiddly bit first. I am sewing with my Gutermann all-purpose thread in black over here on the machine, as well as a size 12 Microtex needle, which is just a very sharp needle, which I like to use. The sharpest needle I've got in stock whenever working with a Lurex thread. So this fabric does have a little bit of that metallic fleck going on, so I wanted to make sure that I was using a very sharp needle for best results. And with my side seams and shoulder seams pressed open, I can go ahead and interface the inside plackety area where the buttonholes and buttons will eventually go down the center front of this blouse. So I'm just grabbing a 2-inch wide piece of fusible interfacing in a similar gray tone, luckily enough, that I had in stock, and just ironing those strips on along the center front of the blouse here. I will then go ahead and grab my hem gauge here, and I'm going to fold this back right sides together, this little plackety bit, at the very top neckline area, fold that back the 1 inch that I want to use for my placket, and I'm going to sew this together up here at the very top so that this area, this point at the top of my blouse, is finished before I sew the rest of my neckline together. Hopefully this will make sense later when you see exactly where this is geographically. I think it's hard to know what I'm doing here, but you'll see in a moment. But just stitching both of those down, this basically finishes the very, very tippy top of my neckline. Then I'll clip my corners and turn those right side out, use a knitting needle to really get in there and make that a nice crisp point. And then I can start thinking about attaching this neckline to my collar, which of course is going to involve a lot of using that gathering thread that I put in earlier. I will use my pattern to mark where the center back and shoulder seams are on my collar itself, and then I'll fold the back neckline of my blouse in half and find the center here as well. That way I can match up those center backs on the collar and the blouse. And I can line up the pin that I put in place along the collar to indicate the shoulder seam with, of course, the shoulder seam. And then I just need to gather everything down in between my pins to fit. So between the center back and the shoulder seam, I have some gathering. So I'll gather this down to fit and kind of wind my threads around to hold them in place for now. Same with the other side. Again, pin my collar to my shoulder seam where it belongs, and then gather down the back neckline into place. As for the fronts, I do need to put a tiny little snip just here in my seam allowance along the neckline. This is going to be a point of weakness for this particular design of blouse. But when I'm hand stitching the collar down along the inside, I just put a few extra stitches here to help secure this area. If you were using a very, very fine, very weak fabric, I probably would recommend doing this a different way. But this is how I finished the collar on my iridescent purple and green blouse as well, if you remember that video. But I'm just going to gather all of this front neckline down as well. A lot more gathering going on here. All of my dart fullness is up here into the neckline, as we know. So I just need to pack all of this down in here and redistribute my gathers so it's at least evenly done. So it's not too, well, I mean, it's very bunchy, but not too bunchy, if you know what I mean. Evenly distributed bunches. And as you can see, I am only pinning one side of my collar to all of this, the interfaced side, because the other side of the collar will be flipped over to hide all of the sins on the inside. And everything will be nice and cleanly finished up here at the neckline, which is great for both looking at the blouse and also for wearing it, because you don't want little ends of metallic threads and linen poking you in the neck. That would just not be very fun. Redistribute my gathers on this side as well, pin everything into place, and take this over to the machine so I can sew this whole collar down onto the blouse. And you can see this is a lot of gathering going on. It's a very gathered blouse. you know. Over here on the machine, I will go ahead and use my 1/2 inch seam allowance as always. And you can see that I'm shaking my left hand as I hold the gathers just to make sure that nothing is getting tucked under where it doesn't need to be, helping this make its journey smoothly through the machine. And then of course I can remove any leftover pins, clip a couple of curves along this neckline because the neckline is technically like a lot of fabric being packed into a very straight cut collar, a slightly curved collar. So I will take a few clips out of this before I press my seam allowance up into the collar and hide it underneath the other side. So I will iron down the 1/2 inch seam allowance of the other side of the collar into place, like so. That way I can flip it down and hide all of this bunched seam allowance into the collar itself. And make sure everything is lining up smoothly, pin into place, and I will actually, you can slip stitch this along the inside. You can actually machine stitch this as well. You can do like decorative top stitching around the whole thing and that will hold it into place as well. But I'm going to actually just fell this down along the inside in here, just because it was going to be fast and easy and no one was going to see my stitches in this wild, metallic, glittery fabric. It's not actually glittery, by the way. It's not like glitter that comes off. It's a metallic thread that just looks like glitter. So it's woven into the fabric, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not a surface texture, it's part of the weave of the fabric itself. I don't like glittery fabrics that shed. Things can be sparkly, but I do not wish for them to be actually glittery, if that makes any sense. But once I have that pinned all into place, I'll take it over to my desk and sit there and fell the inside of this collar down, and again do a little bit of extra stitching right at these like inverse corners, I guess, along the neckline. And I do need to actually just press my front plackety overlap into place because I hadn't done so yet for some reason. So just press that down, that 1 inch of placket, I guess. You can also do like proper plackets on something like this, like I do in my other shirt video. So once again, reference other shirt videos for more options on how to finish them. There are a lot of different options for finishes on collars, plackets, all that, cuffs, all that kind of stuff on collared shirts of any kind. And technically, I guess this would be a collared blouse, even if it's not a fold back collar or a like notched collar, it's just a stand collar. And now it's time to go ahead and put those plackets on these sleeves. And I was immediately realizing, why did I sew this together already? Nobody knows. So I need to come out 5 inches from my underarm seam along the back of my sleeve and 5 inches up. And I actually will go ahead and interface my sleeve itself. We're on the outside of the sleeve right now. I'm going to use a 1 inch wide and 5.5 inches long strip of fusible interfacing just to secure this area because I am about to just cut a slit into the sleeve itself. Be very careful that you're only cutting this and not the underlayer if you, like me, have accidentally sewn these together already. And when it comes to doing these sleeve packets, just be careful and take your time in general, really, because it's kind of a mind bender. So as you can see, as soon as I put this tiny piece of fabric down onto the fabric, we lose sight of it entirely, which is not going to be useful for tutorial-ing today. So I'm sorry about that. Again, do reference the blog post where I originally learned how to do this myself. I will link that below, and then I will also, again, have a couple of other shirt videos linked either in the description or in the cards that you can check out where I do this same technique in a fabric that you can actually see what the heck is going on. But I have to sew on the smaller, slimmer side of my placket first. This is the piece that gets sewn down closer to the underarm seam, and this wider piece here gets sewn on the other side, closer to the front of the sleeve, I guess. But yeah, again, why am I bothering to even try and show and explain this in this fabric when, again, I'm thinking right now as I'm pinning this, I can hardly see this in person. So it really camouflages right the heck in there. It's absolutely impossible. But I'll just start where I stopped on the other side, cross over. This is about a 1/4 inch up from where the end of the slit is, and I'll keep my needle down in that corner and come down again 1/4 inch down the other side. This is one of the only processes I do in the sewing room that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance as opposed to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Of course, the other being French seams, which we also don't see me use very often. But at least I usually remember what the heck I'm doing when it comes to those. Whereas this, I really had to refresh my memory and had forgotten a few steps. So all of that was sewn onto the inside of my sleeve, and now I'm bringing everything to the outside. It also doesn't help that this fabric looks the same on the front and back as well. So again, I'm so sorry. Hopefully you can, if you've done anything like this before, then you're probably following along. If not, then you're lost, and honestly, so am I. But again, check out my shirt video where I do this properly, honestly. But I'm just going to go ahead and let past me finish up these sleeve plackets, and hopefully you can get an idea of what goes into doing one of these. And if you actually would like to try one of these on one of your projects, again, reference my other videos where I go into this in a little bit more detail in a fabric where you can hopefully see what's actually going on. A new development here in the studio this week is that my PC is now making a lovely rattling noise, which does not bother me normally, but when I start to do a little bit of voice work like this, I'm finding it very irritating. I might need to get into the case of the PC and see if there's a fan loose or angry for some reason. It's the last thing I need is extra noises in a house with plenty of people and occasional weather and neighbors doing their lawn work and all that kind of... Finding a time where I can actually do voiceover work where it's not a cacophony of other going on is hard enough without the computer starting to make some noise. Anyhow, here is my finished sleeve placket. Is it the best one I've ever done? No. But you know, luckily it blends into this fabric really well, so no one's really going to see them. It's perfectly functional, everything's finished and all, but oof, it was a bit of a struggle. And then I have my cuffs, which are easy enough to get on here, but I will have to put my gathering stitching in my sleeves finally, because I hadn't done that when it was flat either. I really did these sleeves dirty, let's face it. At least they look nice in the end. But I do like to pre-iron the seam allowance on my cuff, so you can see I've done that here, pressing down the 1/2 inch along each end and along one side of this, and then I use the flat side as the side I'm attaching to my now gathered cuff. Again, I'll pin either side of that and then gather everything down to fit, just like I was doing with the collar earlier. But plenty to gather here as well. It almost seems like there's no way that all this fabric will fit into this cuff, but it does. I could actually fit a little bit more gathering in here. I've done larger sleeves before, and I assume in the future I will do larger sleeves as well, because I do love a gigantic sleeve, as we know. But just distributing those gathers as evenly as I can and pinning them down to my cuff here. And I again have the smooth side up here and the gathering facing the feed dogs. Because the feed dogs are grabbing the fabric and feeding it through the machine, it just helps to have the larger side down towards those feed dogs so that if they grab a little bit extra, it's actually helping as opposed to hindering us. And pins out, I can go ahead and fold that pre-ironed cuff over onto the inside here to hide again all my gathered seam allowance and all the messiness happening on the inside here. And again, you can slip stitch this or top stitch this into place. And I again will be felling it into place. I'll slip stitch the ends, but along the inside here I'm just going to fell that because it's going to be fast, and again the stitches are going to disappear in this wild fabric. And now with my sleeve plackets of doom finished, and everything gathered into their cuffs and finished up, all the hand sewing done at the cuffs, I can go ahead and finish the rest of my blouse before I set these sleeves in. So I will do a similar set of operations here for the waistband. This is a 5-inch wide and like 33-inch long piece of straight cut fabric here that I'm going to use as the waistband on this. I don't use shaped waistbands. I always just use a straight cut waistband. I never make waistband patterns either, just because I'm going to be cutting a long rectangle and I don't need a pattern for that. But I've just marked on here where the ends need to be and marked halfway along this waistband. So this will finish for a 31-inch waist. And I will go ahead and stitch that buddy on here. Luckily no gathering this time. It's just smooth fabric to smooth fabric. What an idea. I did go for a slightly wider waistband this time because I had been making these finish at 1 inch and I decided to extend that to like 1 1/4 this time, just for a little bit of extra room at the waist where this was going to line up probably with a skirt waistband, and one needs to tuck into the other. And again, I will press my seam allowance into the binding, as it were, of this waistband, fold everything over, pin into place. I decided to make this a tiny bit narrower because I was like, I don't want a full 1 1/2 inch wide. Just 1 1/4, please. But then yes, fold everything to the inside and pin it cleanly into place. So I'm just leaving about an inch of extra hanging off the side of this that will overlap and button close later anyhow, which will look like this. And once again, I felled that down, hand stitched everything into place, but I am actually going to do some top stitching on this as well. I like having some top stitching in the waistband just for a little bit of extra stability so that this doesn't roll and bunch up quite as much on itself. So you could use even like stiffer interfacing on something like this, but besides having this already interfaced, I also wanted to throw some top stitching in here too, especially since my stitching gets completely lost again in this, that's right, wild fabric. I didn't realize this fabric was going to be so funky on camera until I got the footage into the editing software and went, oh, I see. Alright, time to go ahead and put some buttonholes on here. What I did is I tried this on, even though it's still sleeveless, and figured out where I wanted the button between the apex, or like along the apex line of my center front of my bust. To keep everything securely closed, I like to have a button directly between the apex, so I just pin that on my body. And then I'll want a button right above the waistband as well, and then I just find the equidistance between those things and put another 3 buttons in there for a total of 5 buttons along the center front here. I will have an additional one along the waistband as well, and then a hook and eye at the very top of this blouse. I can wear it open or hooked depending on how conservative I'm feeling that day. It really stays pretty closed even without the hook and eye, but you never know when you might encounter a, I don't know, large gust of wind out and about in the actual world, which it's about, 25 degrees outside here today, so I'm not going out there no matter what I'm wearing, honestly. And yes, I was just doing a test buttonhole on a bit of scrap fabric here with my Singer buttonholer. This one I think is from 1945, if I'm remembering correctly. This buttonhole attachment is actually older than my sewing machine, because my sewing machine is from 1955, so it's got a decade on the machine, honestly, and they both work just fine, which is lovely. No problem there. But once all my buttonholes are finished, I can open those up with a seam ripper, of course, very, very carefully, and then I will just use those as a guide to mark where I need to sew my buttons on to the other side of my shirt here, of course. And one of my final steps for this, after getting the buttonholes in place, is actually setting my sleeves in. So again, I'll match up my underarm seams, match up the center of the sleeve with my shoulder seam, and then gather down all the excess that I left in the sleeve cap here and keep that concentrated near the sleeve cap so that it will puff over my shoulder in the end. And I'll do that same order of operations for each side, both the front and the back, and also the left and right sleeve. I did manage to pick up this same metallic linen in a black ground with a black lurex running through it, so I might make another one of these in a sparkly black shade sometime. This fabric actually comes in a lot of different colors that are all rather intriguing to me, so I'll link the product page for this particular textile below in case you'd like to check it out. Distribute those gathers. I can bring this over to the machine and go ahead and set in my sleeves. Again, one of the quirks of working with an older machine is that I don't have like a removable end of this, so I can't get inside of the sleeve. I have to be a little bit extra careful when setting in sleeves like this, making sure to re-maneuver and position things every 3 or 4 inches or so as I go around, if that much, honestly. I will start and stop as often as I have to when setting in a sleeve to make sure I only have to do it once, honestly. I will then push all the seam allowance from stitching that into the sleeve itself here. Helps puff out my sleeve cap and give that plenty of steam here with my iron, using my tailor's ham to help me kind of press and steam that into place, because I like having the seam allowance pushed into the sleeve itself. Helps with the amount of puff and just gets it out of the way, makes for a more comfortable fit. Then the very, very last step for this was, of course, to sew on some pretty shell buttons here, and this blouse was ready to wear. And here is my finished metallic linen blouse, ready for sword fighting, swashbuckling, what have you. I even decided to go ahead and try pairing this with a wide corset belt just to really lean into the piratey vibes. And not sponsored or anything, but I picked up this belt from a seller on Etsy, and it's actually exceptional quality. They are a bit of an investment, but I have picked up another one since I first got this one in the mail because this is the black leather version. It's gorgeous. I also have the black patent leather version as well, which I'll show you some other time, and it's just as delicious. So if you've been looking for a corsety belt, I highly recommend this seller. In any case, I hope you enjoyed seeing how this blouse came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!